The winter of 1856 hit the Midwest frontier harder than most. Lars Anderson learned that when his large stone fireplace, built exactly like every settler was told to build it, left his cabin so cold that ice formed on the inside walls just 3 feet from the roaring flames. He had followed the proven frontier wisdom: massive open hearth, stone chimney, constant feeding of logs through the night. Still, his family huddled in blankets while burning through more firewood than 3 families should need. Across the territory, homesteaders faced the same losing battle against the cold in cabins heated by the book and failing by the season. When Lars quietly installed a small iron Franklin stove in his cabin's center, neighbors mocked the tiny contraption. But that strange little stove kept his cabin warmer all winter using 1/4 the wood. What did Lars understand about efficient heating that every other settler had missed? The homestead sat on 40 acres of oak and maple forest, 2 days' hard ride from the nearest trading post, in what would later become southern Wisconsin. Lars Anderson had chosen this remote spot deliberately in 1854, drawn by the dense timber that promised endless fuel for heating and the small creek that ran year-round behind his intended cabin site. Like most Scandinavian immigrants pushing west from the overcrowded settlements near Lake Michigan, he carried with him both the dream of independent land ownership and the practical knowledge of harsh winters that had shaped his childhood in the forests outside Bergen. The cabin Lars built that first summer followed every piece of advice he had received from established settlers. The foundation stones came from the creek bed, hauled by hand, and fitted tight to keep out ground moisture. The walls rose from hewn oak logs, each one notched and fitted with the precision that marked him as a skilled craftsman. But the centerpiece, the element that every frontier family considered the heart of a proper home, was the massive stone fireplace that dominated the cabin's south wall. 8 feet wide and nearly 5 feet deep, it consumed almost 1/4 of the cabin's interior space and required a chimney stack that rose 12 feet above the roofline. This design represented generations of frontier wisdom. Large fireplaces had heated the cabins of Daniel Boone's era and the log homes that dotted Kentucky and Tennessee. They served as cooking space, heat source, and social center all in one. The bigger the hearth conventional thinking held, the better it could combat the brutal winters that killed unprepared settlers every year. Lars had seen such fireplaces in established homesteads during his journey west, their flames casting dancing shadows across rooms where families gathered for warmth and conversation. Yet by December of 1855, Lars's first winter in the new cabin, the flaws in this accepted method became undeniable. Despite feeding the fire continuously from sunset to sunrise, the temperature 10 feet from the hearth never rose above 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The massive opening that was supposed to radiate heat instead created a powerful draft that pulled warm air straight up the chimney and out into the night sky. Cold air rushed in through every gap in the log walls to replace what the fire consumed. On the worst nights, when the wind howled down from Lake Superior, Lars measured ice formation on the interior walls, a sign that the cabin was losing the battle against winter's assault. The wood consumption was staggering. Each cord of split oak lasted barely 10 days, and Lars had calculated he would need at least 8 cords to survive until spring. This meant spending every clear day cutting, splitting, and hauling timber, time that should have been devoted to preparing fields for planting or improving the cabin's defenses against weather. Neighbors faced identical struggles. Thomas Brennan, whose homestead lay 3 miles east, had burned through 6 cords by January and was cutting green wood in desperation. The Henderson family, recent arrivals from Ohio, had already abandoned their first cabin and moved in with relatives after their fireplace proved unable to heat the space they had built. The solution came through Heinrich Muller, a German craftsman who had settled near the trading post and supplemented his farming income by repairing tools and building small ironwork. Muller had served his apprenticeship in Bavaria, where wood was scarce and heating methods had evolved toward maximum efficiency over centuries of refinement. When Lars described his heating troubles during a spring visit to town, Muller shook his head with the patience of a man who had witnessed the same mistakes countless times. Muller explained that the iron stove sitting in the corner of his workshop A compact device barely 3 feet square could heat a space twice the size of Lars's cabin using half the wood. The design, based on Benjamin Franklin's innovations from decades earlier, trapped heat in an iron firebox and radiated it outward through all surfaces instead of allowing it to escape up a chimney. The German had brought the stove west with his own family's belongings, understanding that frontier conditions demanded efficiency above all other considerations. The mathematics were compelling. Muller's stove burned wood completely in its enclosed chamber, extracting every possible unit of heat before the exhaust escaped through a narrow flue pipe. Unlike open fireplaces that lost 80% of their heat to the chimney, the iron stove captured and distributed 90% of the energy contained in each log. A single cord of properly seasoned hardwood could provide the same heating as 3 cords fed to a traditional hearth. Lars purchased the stove for $12, a significant expense that represented nearly a month's earnings from his occasional carpentry. Work. The installation required creating a new flue opening in the cabin's roof and constructing a fireproof base of flat stones beneath the stove's legs. Muller advised positioning the device in the cabin's center rather than against a wall, maximizing the radiation pattern and ensuring even heat distribution throughout the living space. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. On the first night of operation, the small iron firebox heated the entire cabin to a comfortable 60 degrees Fahrenheit using 3 split logs. The steady heat continued for hours after the flames died down, as the iron mass slowly released stored thermal energy. For the first time since building the cabin, Lars could move freely throughout the space without bundling in heavy coats and blankets. News of the strange heating device spread quickly through the scattered homesteads. When neighbors visited to witness the impossible warmth, their reactions revealed the deep conservatism that governed frontier life. The stove's compact size struck many as inadequate, almost insulting to the grand tradition of massive hearths that had warmed their fathers and grandfathers. Margaret Henderson called it "that ugly little box," and predicted it would fail during the first serious cold snap. Thomas Brennan dismissed it as foreign nonsense, unsuited to American conditions and American timber. This resistance reflected more than simple skepticism about new technology. The large fireplace represented cultural values that went beyond mere heating efficiency. It embodied hospitality, prosperity, and connection to the established patterns of American frontier life. To replace it with a compact iron device felt like abandoning something essential about the homesteading experience itself. The true test of the Franklin stove's efficiency came not in its initial installation, but in the weeks of careful adjustment that followed. Lars discovered that the device demanded a completely different approach to fire management than the simple wood-feeding routine of open hearths. The stove's enclosed firebox created specific combustion conditions that required matching fuel types, airflow control, and burning schedules to achieve maximum heat output for minimum wood consumption. The first challenge emerged in understanding the stove's air intake system. Unlike open fires that drew oxygen from the entire room, the Franklin stove controlled combustion through a series of small vents in its iron door and base. Lars learned to manipulate these openings throughout the burning cycle, starting with wide-open vents to establish strong initial flames, then gradually restricting airflow to maintain steady heat without wasting fuel through overly rapid combustion. This technique, which Muller called banking the fire, could extend a single loading of wood from 2 hours of open burning to 6 hours of controlled heat release. Wood selection proved equally critical to efficient operation. The dense hardwoods that fed frontier fireplaces effectively, particularly green or partially seasoned logs, performed poorly in the stove's controlled environment. Lars experimented with different species and discovered that fully dried oak and maple, split to uniform thickness of 3 to 4 inches, burned most completely in the confined space. Soft woods like pine and cedar, abundant in his forest, burned too quickly and created excessive creosote buildup in the narrow flue pipe, reducing the stove's efficiency within days of use. The seasoning process became a precise science. Lars constructed a covered woodshed with open sides that allowed constant air circulation while protecting split logs from rain and snow. Wood stored in this manner for 6 months reached optimal moisture content for stove burning, while logs seasoned for a full year delivered even greater heat output. By measuring the weight difference between fresh cut and properly seasoned oak, Lars calculated that dried wood contained 40% more usable energy per pound than green timber. Temperature control required mastering the relationship between fuel load size and air restriction. A full firebox of seasoned hardwood with vents completely open could drive the cabin temperature above 70 degrees Fahrenheit on mild winter days, creating uncomfortable conditions and wasting fuel through overheating. Lars developed a system of partial loading matched to outdoor conditions and desired interior temperatures. On moderately cold nights, 3 split logs with half-open vents maintained steady 60-degree warmth. During severe cold spells, 5 logs with fully open vents for the first hour, then restricted airflow provided consistent heat through the longest nights. The stove's thermal mass properties revealed another efficiency advantage that became apparent only through extended use. The iron firebox and surrounding metal absorbed heat during active burning and continued radiating warmth for hours after flames died down. This stored energy meant that properly managed fires required refueling only twice daily, morning and evening, compared to the constant feeding demanded by open hearths. The evening fire, banked properly before sleep, maintained cabin temperatures above 50 degrees until morning, even when outdoor temperatures dropped below zero. Ash management emerged as a crucial factor in sustained efficiency. The stove's enclosed design collected all combustion residue in a removable ash pan beneath the firebox. Lars learned to remove ashes weekly during heavy use periods, as accumulated ash restricted airflow and reduced burning temperatures. However, maintaining a thin layer of ash in the firebox bottom actually improved combustion by providing insulation that helped maintain optimal burning temperatures in the iron chamber. The flue pipe system required its own maintenance schedule to preserve efficiency. Unlike open chimneys that allowed creosote deposits to burn off during hot fires, the stove's controlled combustion and lower exhaust temperatures caused gradual buildup in the narrow pipe. Lars developed a monthly cleaning routine using a chain weighted with iron links, pulled through the pipe to scrape away deposits that could reduce draft and create fire hazards. By February of 1857, Lars had refined his stove operation to achieve remarkable fuel economy. Detailed records showed consumption of exactly 2 3/4 cords for the entire winter heating season, compared to the 8 cords his calculations had predicted for fireplace heating. This represented a wood savings of over 5 cords, equivalent to 60 days of cutting and splitting labor that could be devoted to other homestead improvements. The heat distribution pattern provided another unexpected advantage. Unlike fireplaces that created hot zones near the hearth and cold areas in distant corners, the centrally located stove radiated heat evenly throughout the cabin space. Lars could maintain comfortable working conditions at his carpentry bench in the far corner, while his wife tended cooking tasks near the stove. This even heating allowed full use of the cabin's interior during winter months, effectively increasing the family's living space. Other settlers began requesting demonstrations as word spread of the dramatic fuel savings. The Henderson family, struggling with their traditional fireplace, visited during a particularly cold spell in March. Their measurements showed Lars's cabin maintaining 62 degrees Fahrenheit, while their own home, with a fire burning continuously, barely reached 45 degrees 10 feet from the hearth. The broader implications became clear through systematic comparison. Thomas Brennan, still committed to his large fireplace, consumed 7 cords of wood that winter and reported frequent nights when family members slept fully clothed due to inadequate heating. John Patterson, an early convert who installed a similar stove in February, used only 1 cord for his remaining winter heating needs while maintaining consistently warmer interior conditions. These measured results challenged fundamental assumptions about frontier heating methods that had guided homestead construction for generations. The efficiency gains were not marginal improvements, but dramatic shifts in fuel requirements and comfort levels that could determine survival during severe winter conditions. The remarkable fuel efficiency of the Franklin stove revealed a different problem that had remained hidden during the wasteful fireplace era. Even with the iron device generating consistent heat throughout the winter of 1857, Lars noticed that maintaining comfortable temperatures still required more frequent firing than Muller's calculations had suggested. The issue became apparent during windstorms, when interior temperatures dropped rapidly, despite the stove burning at full capacity. The heat was being produced efficiently, but the cabin itself was losing that precious warmth through its walls, roof, and foundation as quickly as the stove could generate it. Lars began systematic observations to identify where his cabin was bleeding heat into the winter air. On calm nights below freezing, he used a candle flame to detect air movement along the interior walls. The flame flickered noticeably near every log joint, revealing that the traditional chinking method was failing to create a truly sealed envelope. Cold air infiltrated through gaps between logs, while warm air escaped through the same openings higher up the walls. The massive stone foundation, considered essential for structural stability, conducted cold directly from the frozen ground into the cabin's interior through thermal bridging effects that no amount of interior heating could overcome. The log construction itself presented fundamental thermal problems that frontier builders had never adequately addressed. Oak logs, despite their structural strength, contained natural moisture channels and grain patterns that created pathways for heat transfer. Even well-fitted logs separated slightly as they continued drying through their first years in the wall, opening gaps that allowed air exchange between interior and exterior. The traditional mud and moss chinking, applied hastily during construction, had cracked and shrunk through multiple freeze-thaw cycles, creating an air leakage system that undermined any heating efficiency gains. The solution came through conversations with Niels Larsen, a Norwegian immigrant who had settled 40 miles north near the timber camps. Larsen had grown up in regions where winter temperatures regularly reached 30 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, and survival depended on building techniques that maximized heat retention rather than simply generating more heat. His family's methods, developed over generations in the forests around Trondheim, approached cabin construction as a complete thermal system rather than merely a structural shelter. Larsen's most important insight involved the concept of thermal mass combined with insulation barriers. Norwegian builders constructed double wall systems with an insulated cavity between inner and outer log layers. The outer wall provided structural strength and weather protection, while the inner wall, separated by a 6-inch gap filled with insulating materials, created a thermal break that prevented direct heat conduction to the exterior. This technique, unknown among American frontier builders, could reduce heat loss through walls by 70% compared to single log construction. Lars began implementing these improvements during the late spring of 1857, starting with the most critical heat loss areas. He constructed an interior wall system using smaller diameter logs positioned 4 inches inside the existing outer walls. The gap between old and new walls received layers of dried grass, cattail down, and shredded bark, materials that trapped air in thousands of tiny spaces to create effective insulation barriers. This natural insulation, properly installed and protected from moisture, performed comparably to expensive manufactured materials while using resources available on any homestead. The foundation presented a more complex challenge requiring different techniques. Lars learned to create a thermal break between the stone foundation and wooden sill plates using layers of birch bark sealed with pine pitch. This prevented the stone from conducting ground cold directly into the cabin's wooden structure. Around the foundation perimeter, he banked earth mixed with straw to a height of 18 inches, creating an insulated barrier that reduced ground heat loss and eliminated air infiltration around the foundation edges. Roof insulation demanded the most extensive modifications. The original roof construction, consisting of split shingles over log purlins, provided weather protection but allowed massive heat loss through the ceiling area where warm air naturally accumulated. Lars installed a complete insulating layer between the roof structure and interior ceiling, using dried marsh grass held in place by a network of thin saplings, woven basket-style between the ceiling joists. This created an insulated airspace that trapped rising warm air before it could escape through the roof system. Window and door sealing required precision work that demonstrated the difference between adequate weatherproofing and true thermal sealing. Lars carved new window frames with multiple contact surfaces that compressed against carefully fitted shutters, eliminating the air gaps that plagued standard frontier window construction. Door frames received similar treatment, with wooden strips that created compression seals when the door closed. Leather weather stripping, cut from deer hides and treated with bear grease, provided flexible sealing materials that maintained contact despite wood movement through seasonal changes. The clay plaster system represented the most sophisticated element of the thermal envelope improvements. Larson taught Lars to mix local clay with chopped straw and deer hair, creating a plaster that sealed air gaps while providing additional insulation value. This mixture, applied in two coats over the interior log surfaces, created a continuous air barrier that eliminated the countless small leaks that undermined heating efficiency. The plaster also absorbed and released moisture, preventing the condensation problems that plagued tightly sealed spaces heated by wood combustion. Testing the completed thermal envelope modifications began during the autumn of 1857. Lars measured temperature retention by banking his evening fire and monitoring interior conditions through the night. Before the improvements, cabin temperature dropped 15 degrees during 8 hours without active heating. After completing the thermal envelope work, the same conditions resulted in only a 6-degree temperature decline, demonstrating that the modifications had reduced heat loss by 60%. The improved envelope also revealed the stove's true efficiency potential. With heat loss controlled through proper insulation and air sealing, the Franklin stove could maintain comfortable interior temperatures using even less fuel than previous calculations had suggested. A single evening fire, properly banked, now kept the cabin above 55 degrees Fahrenheit until morning, even during the coldest weather. The combination of efficient heat generation and effective heat retention had created a heating system that performed beyond either component's individual capabilities. Wind resistance provided the most dramatic proof of the envelope's effectiveness. During severe storms that had previously driven interior temperatures below freezing despite continuous firing, the insulated cabin maintained steady warmth with normal fuel consumption. The double wall system and comprehensive air sealing had eliminated the infiltration that made windy conditions so costly to heat against. With the thermal envelope perfected and the stove's operation mastered, Lars discovered that achieving optimal heating efficiency depended on a third critical factor that most settlers completely ignored: the moisture content of the fuel itself. Even perfectly seasoned wood from his previous year's cutting began showing performance problems as autumn rain soaked the outdoor stacks. Wet logs produced sluggish flames, excessive smoke, and significantly reduced heat output, forcing more frequent reloading and undermining the careful fuel calculations that had proven so effective during dry conditions. The problem became measurable through direct observation of combustion behavior. Logs containing excess moisture hissed and steamed when placed in the firebox, creating water vapor that absorbed heat energy during the evaporation process instead of transferring that energy to the cabin's interior. Lars noticed that wet wood produced dense white smoke that clogged the narrow flue pipe with creosote deposits, requiring weekly cleaning instead of the monthly schedule that had proven adequate for properly dried fuel. Temperature measurements showed that soggy logs generated 30% less usable heat per pound compared to the same wood species when thoroughly dried. The solution required understanding wood as a complex material with specific moisture characteristics rather than simply burnable material. Lars learned from Joseph Crow Feather, an Ojibwe hunter who traded regularly at the settlement, that indigenous peoples had developed precise methods for preparing and storing firewood that maximize burning efficiency during long northern winters. These techniques treated wood preparation as a year-round process, requiring specific timing, storage structures, and protection methods that went far beyond simply cutting and stacking logs. Crowfeather explained that freshly cut wood contained up to 50% moisture by weight, with water stored both in the wood fibers themselves and in the cellular structure that had carried sap when the tree was alive. Achieving optimal burning conditions required reducing this moisture content below 20%, a process that demanded controlled air circulation, protection from precipitation, and sufficient time for gradual moisture release. Different wood species required different drying periods, with dense hardwoods like oak and maple needing 18 months for complete seasoning, while softer woods like ash and birch could reach optimal dryness in 12 months. The storage structure became a precisely engineered system designed to accelerate natural drying while preventing reabsorption of moisture from rain and snow. Lars constructed a dedicated woodshed using a raised foundation of flat stones that elevated the stored wood 18 inches above ground level, preventing moisture wicking from soil contact. The shed's roof extended 4 feet beyond the walls on all sides, creating protection from driving rain while allowing maximum air circulation through the stacked wood. Side walls consisted of widely spaced vertical boards that blocked direct precipitation while permitting constant airflow essential for moisture removal. Interior arrangement followed specific principles that maximized drying efficiency. Wood was stacked in alternating layers with pieces running perpendicular to each other, creating air channels throughout the entire pile. Each layer was separated by small diameter poles that maintained gaps for air circulation while supporting the weight of upper layers. The stack height was limited to 6 feet to prevent compression that could restrict airflow in lower layers. Different species were segregated into separate sections, allowing Lars to track drying progress and select appropriately seasoned wood for immediate use. Testing wood readiness required techniques that provided reliable moisture assessment without specialized equipment. Crow feather demonstrated the sound test, where properly dried logs produced a sharp, clear ringing sound when struck together, while wet wood created a dull thudding noise. The weight comparison method involved marking specific logs when first cut and monitoring weight loss over time, with properly seasoned wood showing 40% weight reduction compared to its fresh-cut condition. Visual inspection of log ends revealed checking patterns and color changes that indicated internal moisture levels. The bark removal technique provided another critical element of proper wood preparation. Lars learned to strip bark from cut logs before stacking, since bark retained moisture and prevented air circulation to the wood surface beneath. Debarked logs dried 30% faster than those with bark intact, and removing the outer layer eliminated, hiding places for insects that could damage stored wood. The stripped bark itself proved valuable as fire-starting material, since the fibrous inner layer caught sparks easily and burned hot enough to ignite larger kindling. Splitting methodology influenced drying rates and final burning characteristics. Wood split immediately after cutting dried much faster than whole logs, since the exposed interior surfaces allowed moisture to escape from the dense heartwood. Split pieces were sized according to their intended use, with smaller pieces for quick-starting fires and larger splits for long-burning overnight heating. The splitting pattern followed the wood's natural grain lines to prevent twisted pieces that would be difficult to stack efficiently and created irregular burning characteristics. Seasonal timing proved crucial for optimal results. Wood cut during late winter or early spring, when sap flow was minimal, contained less initial moisture and seasoned more quickly than wood cut during summer growing seasons. Lars scheduled his major wood cutting for February and March, allowing the entire growing season and following winter for thorough drying before the wood was needed for heating. This 18-month cycle ensured that his heating wood reached optimal moisture content well before the critical winter months when efficiency mattered most. Protection from re-wetting required ongoing maintenance throughout the storage period. Lars covered the top of each woodpile with overlapping pieces of birch bark that shed water while allowing air circulation. The shed roof was inspected monthly for leaks that could re-wet properly seasoned wood. Ground drainage around the shed was maintained to prevent standing water that could create humid conditions inside the storage area. The results of proper wood storage became apparent during the winter of 1858. Lars measured his fuel consumption using systematically prepared wood and found that properly seasoned logs required 30% less volume to maintain the same interior temperatures compared to marginally dried wood from the previous year. Individual logs burned completely to fine ash instead of leaving partially combusted chunks that wasted fuel potential. The consistent moisture content allowed precise fire management, since each log performed predictably in terms of burning duration and heat output. Most significantly, the combination of dry wood and efficient storage eliminated the emergency wood cutting that had plagued previous winters. When severe weather prevented outdoor work for days at a time, Lars could rely on his stored supply lasting exactly as calculated, without the inefficiency losses that forced desperate cutting of green or wet wood during the worst possible conditions. The ultimate test of Lars's integrated heating system arrived with the winter of 1859, when a series of Arctic storms brought the most severe cold in decades to the Wisconsin frontier. The first blizzard struck in mid-January, dropping temperatures to 25 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit and maintaining those conditions for 8 consecutive days. Winds exceeding 40 miles per hour created whiteout conditions that made travel between homesteads impossible and forced families to survive entirely on stored resources. This prolonged extreme weather would either validate Lars's methodical approach to heating efficiency or expose fatal flaws in his departure from traditional methods. During the storm's peak, Lars implemented crisis heating protocols that his integrated system made possible. The combination of superior insulation, efficient combustion, and properly prepared fuel allowed him to maintain interior warmth using emergency heating schedules that would have been impossible with conventional fireplaces. Instead of continuous burning that consumed vast quantities of wood, Lars operated on a cycle system where the stove burned intensively for 4 hours, then relied on retained heat in the thermal mass, an insulated envelope to maintain temperatures for the following 4 hours. This approach stretched his fuel supply while maintaining consistent interior conditions. The thermal banking technique proved crucial during the extended cold spell. Lars loaded the stove completely full of his driest hardwood at sunset each day, then restricted airflow to create slow, steady combustion that continued through the night. The insulated walls and ceiling retained this heat so effectively that morning temperatures in the cabin never dropped below 52 degrees Fahrenheit, even when outdoor temperatures reached their lowest points. By contrast, traditional heating methods required constant attention and fuel feeding throughout the night to prevent dangerous interior cooling. Temperature measurements during the crisis revealed the dramatic superiority of the integrated approach. While Lars maintained steady interior conditions between 52 and 64 degrees throughout the 8-day ordeal, his neighbors struggled with interior temperatures that fluctuated wildly between 40 and 55 degrees despite burning wood continuously. Thomas Brennan's cabin, still heated by the massive stone fireplace, reached a low of 38 degrees during the storm's worst night, forcing his family to sleep directly beside the hearth and risk carbon monoxide exposure from poorly drafted combustion. The wood consumption comparison provided the most striking evidence of system efficiency. Lars used exactly 12 logs per day during the extreme weather, consuming a total of 96 pieces of split hardwood for the entire 8-day period. This represented less than 1/4 cord of wood to maintain comfortable living conditions through weather that killed inadequately prepared settlers across the territory. Brennan consumed more than 2 full cords during the same period while achieving inferior heating results, demonstrating that traditional methods became increasingly wasteful under severe conditions. Emergency food preparation capabilities highlighted another advantage of the integrated system. The consistent interior temperatures allowed Lars's family to cook meals normally using the stove's flat-top surface, while neighbors with traditional fireplaces struggled to maintain cooking fires that competed with space heating for limited fuel supplies. The Henderson family, whose heating struggles had continued despite witnessing Lars's success, was forced to eat cold preserved foods for 3 days when their fireplace consumed all available wood for basic warmth. The storm's aftermath brought the first widespread acknowledgement of Lars's heating innovations from previously skeptical neighbors. When travel became possible again, Thomas Brennan visited to examine the stove system firsthand and request detailed instructions for installing similar equipment in his own cabin. Margaret Henderson, who had dismissed the iron device as inadequate, asked specific questions about insulation techniques and wood storage methods. The crisis had provided undeniable proof that traditional heating wisdom was not merely inefficient, but potentially dangerous during severe weather events. Word of the heating system's performance spread rapidly through the scattered settlements as survivors shared their experiences of the brutal storm. John Patterson, who had installed a Franklin stove the previous year but lacked the insulation and wood storage improvements, reported that his partial system had performed better than traditional fireplaces, but still required excessive fuel consumption. His experience demonstrated that the true efficiency came from integrating all components rather than implementing individual improvements in isolation. The spring of 1859 brought a steady stream of visitors seeking to understand and replicate Lars's heating methods. Heinrich Müller, the German craftsman who had sold the original stove, found himself overwhelmed with orders for similar devices as word spread of their performance during extreme conditions. Local carpenters began requesting instruction in double-wall insulation techniques, while families throughout the region modified their wood storage practices to achieve proper seasoning. The adoption process revealed how traditional knowledge could spread through frontier communities when its advantages became undeniable. Samuel Crawford, a recent settler from Pennsylvania, visited in April to document the complete heating system before constructing his own cabin. Crawford meticulously recorded measurements, construction techniques, and operating procedures, creating the first written description of the integrated approach that would guide other builders. His documentation included specific timber quantities, insulation materials, and seasonal preparation schedules that transformed informal knowledge into transferable, technical information. By 1860, 7 homesteads within a 20-mile radius had implemented versions of Lars's heating system, each adapted to local materials and specific cabin designs. The modifications demonstrated the flexibility of the underlying principles while maintaining the core efficiency advantages. Peter Novak, a Czech immigrant, used locally abundant pine needles as insulation material and achieved thermal performance nearly equal to Lars's original grass and bark mixture. The Williams family combined the stove system with a masonry heat bank that stored additional thermal energy from extended burning periods. The broader influence extended beyond immediate neighbors to affect regional building practices. Traveling craftsmen carried knowledge of the techniques to distant settlements, while supply networks developed to provide Franklin stoves and related materials to areas previously dependent on traditional fireplace construction. The territorial government's land office began recommending efficient heating methods to new settlers, recognizing that survival during severe winters required more than basic shelter construction. The integrated heating system had evolved from individual innovation to proven frontier technology, validated by the ultimate test of extreme weather survival, and adopted by practical homesteaders who valued efficiency over tradition. The methods that had seemed foreign and suspicious just 3 years earlier had become the new standard for serious cold weather construction, proving that technical innovation could overcome established practices when tested by harsh frontier realities.